The Prod Box brings experiences from myself, industry professionals, colleagues, senior leaders, and discussions on key topics within the product management and technology space from a player and coaching point of view, aiming to help us all learn and succeed in building great product management teams, resulting in great software products. So welcome and enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe or join our mailing list at theprodbox.co.uk. Hello everyone and welcome to the Podbox episode 4, Product Management and Agile Transformation. So today I am joined by Iain Bishop, who has spent over 20 years as CTO, driving value creation and growth, scaling software businesses, creating and internationalizing great products and building highly productive software engineering teams globally. So thank you, Iain, for taking the time out today to join me.
Hi, Lucinda. Thank you for inviting me to join your podcast.
So, change and transformation is hard in any organization working towards implementing a more agile way of working using Scrum, Kanban, scaled agile framework or similar can bring many challenges to an organization. And it often isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. So today I'd like to explore the transformation to agile and the role product management, development, and the wider business play in that transformation. So Iain, you have implemented and influenced a number of agile transformations over the years. What, in your experience, are the key drivers for agile transformation within an organization?
Okay, so for an organization to feel the need to move towards an agile way of working, there are usually some business problems that are driving that. And the sort of things I tend to have seen are things like poor quality, late software deliveries, software that's once it's eventually delivered, not actually meeting what the user and what the customer needs. Little engagement with stakeholders, be they internal or customers. And there's also a lack of business agility. So quite often with the old-fashioned waterfall processes, they're so front-loaded with big documents being produced and so much time is spent early on that if a change is needed or suggested later on to meet a customer need or whatever, it can be very difficult to then re-engineer the process that has gone before it and actually implement the change. So you lose a lot of business agility when you don't have an agile way of working within your business.
Absolutely. And I think the key there was definitely delivering often and, providing value to your users or customers sooner rather than later, because business problems change and often we are not able to react to that because we have front loaded a lot of the requirements and have tried to pull together the full picture when we actually might not know it and it may change in the future. So it's definitely key that you pull that out. That's fantastic. So what challenges are organizations likely to face whilst embarking on this journey to agility?
Well, I think one thing to remember is a transformation to an agile way of working is a real cultural shift for an organization. So it's not easy. It's quite a difficult thing to execute. When people are faced with something new, they tend to try and relate it to what they understand. And one of the challenges may be people just renaming things that they used to do using the agile terminology, but carrying on working the way they used to. So the real challenge, to be honest, is to ensure that you've got people within the organization who really understand what good looks like. How should an agile team function? So having some good catalysts for change, maybe an agile coach brought into the business, maybe people either already employed or people who would get employed, who have an understanding and a real belief about agile development. It's also fundamental that the person at the top of the function has a really good understanding of agile and is also committed to it and isn't just doing it because they've been told to or they've heard it's a good thing to do. It's really important to have the commitment from the top as well. Without that, as soon as there's a bump in the road, as there often is when you try and do something new, it's too easy for people to revert to what they understand and continue doing things in the old way. So I think there are quite a few challenges. And I think some of the ways to resolve those challenges is to introduce key resources within the team. So, Lucinda, with your product background, I guess you're familiar with the sort of differences between the BA, business analyst, and the product owner. And,
Yep.
People could see that they sort of do the same thing. They both look after requirements. But in my experience, the role is quite different. The business analyst may typically be there just to document all the things a customer may need, whereas a product owner takes a broader ownership of what they're looking to deliver, engage with the customers and the stakeholders, but also have a really good understanding of the value that they're looking to deliver, and they're able to prioritize the work based on the value.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good point that you touched on there about the different roles in an organization when it comes to product management. So if you're looking at BA roles, PO roles, and product management roles, they're all slightly different. So it all depends on where the organization is headed. And in order to get there, what roles are needed to service that.
And also part of that, one thing that's quite often different with a good agile process is the way that people work together as in a team. So I've seen frequently with sort of old-fashioned ways of working, people would work on their own, and then they'd be given a piece of work to do, they'd complete it and hand it off to somebody else who would then maybe test it sometime later, or another piece of work would be done. In a good agile Scrum type way of working, you have teams working together, product owner, the developers, the testers, UI designers, whoever's needed in the team, but they work as a unit. They succeed and fail together. And that can be quite a challenge for people. There's nowhere to hide when your team is all working, when you have a team
Yeah,
working together on something.
absolutely. And just to touch on it, I think some organizations, they'll try to implement Agile and try to slot existing roles into these Agile roles as part of, for example, Scrum, as you mentioned. So if in an organization you have project managers, for example, they'll try to slot them into a product manager role or product owner role, but you can't fit a square peg in a round hole sort of thing. So you need to get that training and understand that people need to change and they need to understand what the benefits of the role are and how they can, adapt to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very much a collaborative way of building software. So again, if you have someone who's used to sort of dictating and telling people what to do, that doesn't necessarily work too well. The Scrum Master is a unique role within Scrum, but their role isn't to tell people what to do. It's called a servant leader type role where they're there to facilitate, they're there to make sure everybody is contributing, and you don't have somebody dictating from one side as to what should be done and how it should be done. Obviously, the product owner's role is to prioritize the work, but then the team have to work collaboratively from that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the challenges, certainly that I have faced in an organization moving from a more waterfall way of working to agile, is definitely, and you mentioned this in the previous question, moving from a upfront functional specification way of working to a more iterative approach and thinking about the MMP. So, what is our minimum marketable product to for our customer, and how can we get that out as quick as possible? And I think it's hard for some organizations to change very quickly to that way of working because they're just simply not used to it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because you can think that agile is just a process for how you develop the software itself, but there are broader aspects to that as well. Whether it's getting a minimum marketable product or a minimal viable product (MVP), it's the idea of getting something that's pretty good out in front of customers early, so that you can get some feedback and then you can adapt it and you can move on, rather than waiting until you've done dotted every I and crossed every T of your product before you release it. I think that's a really good, important point. It's not just about the development side of things, it's broader within an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it brings us quite nicely into my next question, which is How does agile transformation benefit an organization?
So there's as I mentioned earlier, it's a cultural shift really. You can see how we've got various very clear processes within development, Scrum, for example, or Kanban, where there are processes with clear ceremonies, i.e. the types of meetings you have, the regular heartbeat of delivery. But in itself, the process gives you far more visibility of progress. It allows far more collaboration within the business. So others who may not normally get involved in the development process can see the software as it's being built, can contribute to it, can add value. And it's the same for customers. And I've seen great response from customers who, for the first time, have been involved as something is being built. And if you've got your customer on side whilst you're building something, they are part of the team as well. And you know what it's like with new products. Sometimes they're not perfect once they're released. But if your customer was part of that process to create it, they're much more likely to accept issues that arise and give you some time to resolve them before moving on.
One quote that I like to use is done is better than perfect. The key is to just get your product out there and get that feedback and start the feedback loop from your customers, and if they're part of that development process, if you can get your users to be involved in it, then absolutely it will bring a great benefit to the organization.
It's also, I think, something that can be culturally useful for potentially other parts too. If your business is used to having a long period of configuration, maybe executed by the services team before a customer can go live, again taking an MVP approach, maybe using templates. Again, it's part of the culture to maybe look at trying to get the product out in the customer's hands and then adapt it later, change the configurations later, but start from something that's maybe a good 80% fit rather than trying to make something 100% fit. It tends to be better for the business financially as well to do things like that.
That's great, Ian. So what part does product management play, and why do you feel this is key in agile transformation?
Well, I think product management really need to be engaged in the process. This isn't something somebody else does. That they need to be involved. They need to be driving the value-based prioritization. And that really comes from having a really good business case where the why is understood. Why are we building this thing? Why are we doing this development, this project? So that needs to be clearly articulated. And then that will really help the prioritization from that point onwards so that we can ensure that we're focused on the end result that we're looking to achieve. I think some of the things we mentioned earlier, the MMP, I think is a great concept for product management to really embrace, to look at how they can get a minimum marketable product out as soon as possible, and then look to iterate once that's released. The same for the MVP for the product itself. So if you have a product management function that insists on having all the bells and whistles on a product before it gets launched, then you're almost creating a bit of a straitjacket for yourself. It's far better to be able to focus on the least that you can, get it out there, get some feedback, and then look to improve it after that. What do you think?
I feel, the straight jacket comment definitely resonates, because you don't really want to box yourself in. You need to have that agility in development, in product management, in understanding where the value lies in your product, because business problems change, as I mentioned earlier. And certainly when moving from waterfall to agile, how we create products from inception to completion, the whole process is key when thinking about, implementing an agile change. All our requirements are not upfront. We are not creating and then delivering and that's it. It's an iterative process, so product management should recognize that agility. And I feel when you're looking at implementing an agile change, everybody should be agile. So the development team is agile. You have your Scrum teams. If you've implemented Scrum, for example, your marketing team is agile because they're working closely with the development teams, with the product owners, with product management, if it's a separate function, to create the product launch activities and gather that feedback. If you have a product marketing team as well, or product marketing manager who looks at that whole process as well. So it is definitely key, and agree with what you said, Ian.
Just to extend that slightly further as well, I think the product manager frequently has the relationship with the customers, or they should have the relationship with the customers, because that's how they really understand what it is that they're looking for us to develop and why. And it's being able to leverage those customer engagements and bring them into the process, I think, is really important. And there's also, if it's a brand new product, being able to create relationships where people will act as development partners as we're building something new. I think that's really critical too.
Definitely having those early adopters is key and benefits your product greatly. And you can start to recognize value early on in the product development process if you do have the ability to have those early adopters on board. So, what challenges do you feel product management are likely to face during this transformation?
Well, I guess quite often the challenges come when change happens. If something happens that causes plans to change, hopefully the process will help support that. But sometimes you can have the process which is running up against maybe the way a customer would like to work. So, for example, if there's a major customer-funded project and the customer wants to see a big document up front before they start with a fixed scope, then that can obviously work a little bit against what you're trying to achieve here, but it should still be possible to iterate through the development process, involve the customers during the process, and then manage any change that comes through it. The other thing that's in a similar way can be challenging for a product manager is if there's a fixed scope or fixed time for delivery. So, for example, if it's something that's a legislative change, so some changes, some of us have worked in public sector areas where the government may change the rules. You may have to develop something to support the businesses you sell to with new rules by a certain date with a fixed scope. And sometimes that can be challenging too. But hopefully, many of the good things that we do as we build software with the engagement of stakeholders, with the visibility of the iterative development, the 2 weekly scrums, the sprint reviews that come with that, etc., that can help us manage what we're doing and make it more successful.
Definitely. And I think, one thing you mentioned about fixed scope, also kind of the fixed deadlines, a structured release process. I feel sometimes technology or R&D or your development department may be moving faster than the rest of the business in terms of transformation. And if product management sits outside of that function, then it can be quite difficult to keep up in terms of your conflicting priorities, your delivery, iterating. So that can be quite challenging for a product manager. A quote that I quite like as well by Jeff Bezos is, you need to be stubborn on vision but flexible on the details. I think that sums up some of the
Absolutely.
challenges quite well.
I think that's a really good quote and fits very well what we need to do as we're building products in an agile way. As long as we're getting to the vision, some of the details might change. Some things might take longer than others. So there might be better ideas that we get from stakeholders as we're building software and showing it to them. But as long as we deliver against the vision and the overall goals, then we're successful.
Absolutely. So it's always important to make time for innovation. We all love to innovate. We like to experiment, test things out. It's desirable, but often quite difficult. What do you feel, in your experience, can be done to solve this? What have you tried before?
Yeah. Well, obviously, we all want to innovate, but we're always frequently under pressure to deliver against commitments, particularly in a growing business, particularly when we're resource constrained as well. And I think the only way really if you want to be serious about innovation is to allow some time for it. You have to build some time into your capacity planning. So some organizations go through a process of planning, maybe annually, maybe related to the budget process, or 6 monthly. But if you can keep some time aside for innovation projects, then you will have the ability to implement some innovation, you would hope. But also within that, there are different types of innovation. There may be major innovation projects, maybe building something new, maybe bringing in some new technology. But there's also the need to be able to do some research. And there are different techniques for that, which maybe you need to look at trying to build that into the development plans you have. Maybe spend some time every sprint on doing some research, or maybe spend some time after every release, just allocate some time to being able to work through some ideas of potential innovation projects. And again, working that further back upstream, you need to have some means of capturing ideas that you want to look at, whether it's particular technologies like AI, ML, or some particular business problems you want to try and see if we can solve in a better way. And it'd be great to have somebody who actually owns that, takes the feedback from whatever sources, and perhaps produces a list of projects for the different development teams where they could start looking at doing some research. I think it's important to try and create some structure around this too. So I think the ideal for me would be to focus the teams on picking up a project, but looking to deliver a prototype, some estimates after a period of time, maybe present that back to the management team or the product management team to then look to get some further support and a process where that can then be prioritized and maybe factored into the normal prioritization process for the projects overall. It's got to have somewhere to go, which is why I started with that. Unless you have some time to implement some innovation, it won't happen. And then people will just get a bit demoralized with the process. They may have some great ideas, but no actual opportunity to innovate, to implement them.
I think the key there was the point you made about setting time aside for it. It won't happen if you don't set time aside. And there are some things you can implement as product managers, like, for example, dual track agile. So you're actually working on your discovery as well as focusing on your kind of plans or your vision or your that have been set on the roadmap, but also just alternating between discovery and development. So you can understand which ideas are viable and then build those into the roadmap. That can be quite helpful.
Yeah, I think these are all good techniques. I think one important way of looking at it as well is from the company's point of view. When you look at how you invest your pounds or dollars or euros in your development function and your product function, if you look at it by seeing how much you're spending on things which will drive business growth, how much you're spending on technical debt, how much you're spending on support or maintaining your customers, you may find that maybe there aren't enough initiatives here to drive that growth. We all need to drive growth. And if there aren't enough initiatives that are clearly going to be driving growth, additional revenue for the business, then you need to innovate. And that innovation might lead to development projects. It also might lead to a decision to buy, partner, or even acquire a business to help you drive through some innovation.
It's a bit of a balancing act because as product managers, you want to deliver and you want to deliver value quickly to your customers and you want that feedback and you want to obviously see the return on investment from your product. But at the same time, as you said, you need to think about the future instead of focusing on now all the time and just making time for that and making sure the budget has innovation implemented within it.
Yes, absolutely.
Otherwise, you can't execute against it.
Yes, and be surprise, surprise. If you don't plan for it, it won't happen. So you actually
Exactly.
have to plan for innovation and allow some space for it, even if you're under pressure. If you start with that, it's like, you can't not support your customers. You've got to be able to fix issues that your customers raise. You also should be doing some work on technical debt. Otherwise, your product could become very outdated and it could cause other issues. You've got to have a sensible outlook as to how you invest in your product. Innovation has to be part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it can be argued that strategic planning and delivery conflicts with the concepts of lean enterprise and agile planning and can therefore be the cause of agile transformations failing in larger organizations. How can organizations overcome this, do you think?
Well, I mean, one of the things you were talking about earlier with having a very clear vision, I think is really important for a business. And the vision will be coming out of the strategic plan, I would imagine. And I think there's nothing wrong with having a plan, maybe looking at a 12-month period, but then having more detail planning within that, which allows more flexibility. So, for example, planning for some time for things that are currently not known, because the only thing you do guarantee is things will change. And if you have to keep reprioritizing things constantly when you've got a fixed capacity, then obviously that could be very frustrating for all involved. So I don't think there's anything conflicting necessarily between the two. They both can be managed, but you need to think ahead, look ahead as to what may happen, and then try and manage that before it does happen. So if change is likely, then plan in some time to allow you to manage the change, or a process to allow you to manage change.
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, you can do both.
Yeah,
So,
why
and
not?
work in an agile way, you need to have some ability to be flexible, whether if there are requirements coming up that you haven't planned for that are not part of the vision, that's, a new direction in your market, then you need to keep funding aside to address those requirements, or as you mentioned earlier, get a third party to work on those requirements. It's all about building in the capacity planning to allow for the flexibility you need.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, who doesn't want a business that's agile and able to respond to customers? Who doesn't want a process which gives you good visibility of progress and gives you the ability to engage customers and stakeholders as you're building things? Who wouldn't want that?
Yeah, exactly. So the goal is structured, as I mentioned earlier, and we just have to think, okay, agility exists in the business. Does agility exist in the strategy as well? Great. So, lastly, leadership agility in product, technology, and the wider business. How important is it?
Of course, it's very important because this all comes from the top. If the leadership doesn't really understand the vision, if the leadership doesn't understand the need for agility, then you'll have issues. This doesn't mean that things change. I mean, part of the role of leadership is to try and keep the ship on a even keel. Throwing in another cliche, um, um, as well as being able to adapt to change and manage the change. I think that's the key thing. You don't, keep flipping every day when something new comes in. You have a process where you can manage change, and then you can be receptive to it and look for opportunities to support the business and the customers in any way that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And working in product management, we've all experienced at some point in our careers, I think, leadership which sometimes goes against where we're headed as an organization. But I think, having that data, keeping alive the benefits of this change for the organization, maybe finding the bright spots if you're doing it slowly through different business units, so working in development, changing to an agile way of working, and then the rest of the business will follow if they see the benefits of that change. And also shrinking the change will help with that alignment. So generally, if the change just seems huge, then you won't get that buy-in straight away. So trying to have a plan for that transformation and always recognizing the benefits definitely helps for that.
So yeah, sometimes it's good to it's better to start small, get a
Yeah.
quick win, maybe take on the change in process with one particular team or product, see the success, see how motivated and people are, see what the morale is like, see what the customer feedback is like. And it's people will change if they want to change. So you almost need to have a proof point, show people how good things could be if they are struggling to accept the need for change. And then once you've done that and ensured it's successful, then hopefully the rest of the business will follow. I've done that as well myself successfully in the past.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you, Ian. So, any final thoughts and takeaways for our audience?
Okay, well, I guess the final thought here is we talk quite a lot about process and agile transformation is a change in process, a cultural change. But at the end of the day, the reason we're doing this is that we can give our customers better products. We have to remember
Absolutely.
that the customers are the reason for this. And, the business will benefit, if the customers feel that they're getting great service, great products from us, they'll want to buy more products. The business will benefit. People within the company as well, other stakeholders will benefit. They'll be more engaged, there'll be more collaboration, and it'll become a far more positive experience where people are working together to a common goal. And that common goal is to service our customers.
So if we do the right thing for our customers, then the business will recognise the value.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you, Iain, for joining me today. And let our audience know, how can they contact you?
Okay, so if you want to contact me to discuss any of this, then my name's Iain Bishop, Iain Bishop. You can contact me on LinkedIn, or my email address is ian.bishop1@gmail.com. Thank you very much, Lucinda.
Thank you, Iain.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and please share with others who may find it interesting or useful. And don't forget, you can subscribe to our mailing list at thepodbox.co.uk and join the conversation on Instagram or Twitter @thepodbox. See you on the other side.